One of my colleagues was joking with me and said at NRF, because of just all the signage everywhere, he was like, "Did you know that the letters AI are in retail?" Like, no
Are you
way.
kidding me? I
It
know.
was everywhere. So yeah, um, there's no question that there's a huge amount of hype around AI right now, and the benefits that it can bring to retail. And I think for me, it all comes back to kind of where I started this, which is how do you drive efficiencies?
Amanda Oren is VP of Industry Strategy, Grocery, North America at Relux. And between our teams and our schedules, we've been trying to have this conversation for roughly a month, and we've been throwing calendars back and forth wildly. We finally made it. So, Amanda, thank you. Really appreciate this.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited that we made this work.
There's a lot to talk about here. I know just before we hit the record button, we had touched on a couple things where there's a lot of overlap between your wheelhouse and what this audience really likes to pay attention to. So before we get into any of that, just for further context, would you tell us about your role at Relex and really, for people who may not know what Relex is really all about?
Absolutely, that sounds great. So I've been here almost a year now, and I focus exclusively on grocery North America. Relex is a company that was founded in Helsinki, Finland, about 20 years ago by several data science and supply chain engineers, and they have a very, very big stronghold in grocery Europe. And over the last 7 years or so, have been penetrating North American retail at large and specifically grocery. So I came in with a background 100% on the on the retail side of the house. I've never worked in technology in my life, but came in to help educate internally and help kind of build trust and evangelize externally around what we do and why we can add so much value. And I come to Relax actually as an ex-customer. So that's part of how I know the platform.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Are you able to say who you were working for as a customer?
Sure, absolutely. I was working for a company called which is an online Asian grocer based in California.
Okay. And you had hired Relex to come in and do their thing.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, interesting. So going through your materials, I saw one statistic which just stood out because frankly, I don't know if anybody's really bold enough to put this kind of thing in print, but I'm just going to put it out here now. And that is um, customers achieve 20% reduction in inventory costs with Relux solutions. And I know you wouldn't put it out there if it wasn't supportable, but that's a big number. And it's a big
It is a
number to
big
put it
number.
in writing because that kind of means that's the expectation level, you know? Um,
Yeah, I think it depends on exactly the scenario, obviously, but let me just tell you a little bit about the platform, what we do, and why we feel like we can make bold statements like that. So we provide kind of a unified retail planning solution that helps both retailers and now also consumer packaged goods companies optimize not only supply chain, but also merchandising and store operations. So we are natively cloud-based platform, have been since the beginning, leveraging lots of AI and machine learning, which I know are big buzzwords today, but we use them to be able to deliver more accurate demand forecasts, basically, and that's kind of sits at the center of the entire platform is that demand forecast that helps you
okay.
understand better how much space you should be putting on your shelves for each product, how much inventory you need on hand, what your safety stock should look like, and ultimately, especially when it comes to grocery, how to optimize both your sales by not having out of stocks as well as your shrink by not having too much in stock.
Okay, thank you, because that was my next question. I mean, spoken to a lot of very smart people over the past couple of months who operate and they kind of we optimize retail, but it means so much. There's so much kind of
Yes.
baked into that. So,
Yeah,
so
it can mean a lot of different things. But I do think, when I think about, especially on the grocery side, as I think about kind of a grocer's solution architecture, they have these transactional, more foundational solutions like a point of sale system, an ERP solution, financial ERP, warehouse management solution, et cetera, that are more transactional. And we kind of sit on top of a lot of those solutions to help them get to a more optimized state.
Interesting. Which brings up all kinds of technology kinds of questions, because that's a lot of stuff to sit on top of and kind of aggregate. It really is. I mean, it's a giant amount of stuff, actually.
Yeah.
One of the most fun aspects of this job is I get to talk to people who are coming up with creative solutions right now to do those kinds of things in various sectors. But it's a big undertaking. I mean, you've got to, just to put it out there, you've got to have integrations and ways of aggregating data that could come from dozens of different directions in dozens or more different formats, and your job is to make sense of all that. And
That's true. I would say that retailers are getting a lot savvier over the last 5 to 10 years on that front, and a lot of them have that layer that actually does all of that for you. So there's like one central place where all the data is aggregated into, and has like very clear APIs to all the existing solutions. So I think it used to be more complex, but that's obviously in the best case scenario. Not everybody has that just yet.
right. Well, you actually do this for a living. I only get to talk to people who do this for a living. So you're going to have a real kind of real world view of it. But in my conversations, I would say 95% of them, one or both parties to these transactions are struggling with data integration, especially
Right.
when it comes to, optimizing whatever it happens to be.
No, that's right. It's not only that, but it's also like data cleanliness as well. I don't know if that's the right term, but making sure that you have, UPCs are attached to the right items, and that you're tracking things properly, which is, once again, in grocery, extremely complex. If you think about the idea of having a can of Coke that you can sell as an each or as a 6-pack, even just that concept and how to set that up in any sort of system and make sure that you can track them separately, even though they're the same item, is extremely complex.
Yeah. Yeah. So good on you and your engineers for even choosing that path, because it's a lot to consider.
Well, as actually our founders were really, really, really laser focused on the idea that there was so much food waste in the world, and they really felt like they were getting PhDs, and they were in this very education focused world where they were becoming professors, basically going down a path to become professors, and they realized that they really wanted to go into the real world and solve real world problems with the solutions that they had built, rather than sort of evangelizing them in the world of academia.
Interesting. That's a whole nother topic, because I know a bunch of academics who would probably love to make that jump.
Yeah, it's not so easy, to your point.
It's not. I have, lots of friends and colleagues and family, as a matter of fact, who are in academia, and they're kind of looking, out from the inside or inside in from the outside, kind of going, I want to be there. But anyway, that is another conversation, because that's a hard dog leg. Before we hit the record button on this conversation, we touched on the idea of supply chain transparency and traceability, which are big topics right now. We publish on that quite a bit, especially recently. And it occurs to me that your role at Relex and what you do and how you see the world of grocery be really interesting, just to get your thoughts on, how's that all maturing right now? Because, transparency has been kind of an idea for a long time, but up until fairly recently, if we want to make that, it's not really been achievable. It's just been a great thing to pursue. The 2025 Global Exie Awards are now open for entries. The Exies are the first and only awards program dedicated to highlighting the innovative approaches to customer experience, CX, employee experience, EX, user experience, UX, UI, experience design, and experience architecture across verticals, retail experience, travel experience, healthcare experience, and more. We're working with a growing list of sponsors and partners around the world to honor the breakthrough approaches to creating experiences that drive results. The confluence of technologies and the convergence of business necessities are driving some of the most creative experiences ever, and we think it's time to give credit where credit is due. The 2025 Global XE Awards are now open for entries, and early bird pricing ends soon. To learn more, go to xeawards.com, that's EXXY awards.com, or visit customerland.net and click on the XE banner.
Yeah. And I would say that this new regulation that is in the process of being put in place, which is called FSMA 204, around traceability for food, is trying to move the needle and trying to create progress. And I think it is doing that. However, there are still a lot of grayness around what is actually possible. So, for example, is it possible to trace food from supplier all the way to, from the field, if it's produce, let's say, all the way from the farmer to the retailer, to the retail location? Or is the expectation to trace it all the way to the consumer and all the way to the point of sale? And those two are quite different. And there's a huge level of complexity in tracing it all the way to the point of sale. And so there's a lot of grayness right now that is being discussed in the industry. I think there's some education going on for the lawmakers around exactly what that would take, and there's sort of a little bit of a negotiation, I would say, going on around how to interpret some of the legislation that was put in place without that next level of detail really at the time. So that is a big topic of discussion right now in Washington, actually.
Yeah, it's giant, and it's I think one of the places I do want to go carefully is the trade policy, some of what the new administration is proposing out there, or forget proposing, they're just doing, creates a lot of headwind for these kinds of initiatives. And, they can be capital intensive. They require a lot of planning on the part of anybody involved, the host company or any of their vendors. So these giant investments in time, energy, and money. And as you said, there was kind of a lack of clarity to begin with. And now you've got, complicated culture and regulatory hurdles that are starting to appear out of nowhere. How is the grocery world handling that at the moment? And just to put a stake in the ground, it's February 10th, 2025 right now. And, so I'm putting that out there because it'd be great to revisit this in 6 months or a year and see what really happened. But how's grocery viewing all this right now?
Yeah, so my understanding is that the FSMA 204 regulation is supposed to go into effect. I think it's January 1st, 2026. So the clock is seriously ticking. So the way that what I've heard and seen around how grocery is handling this is to do their best to come together. And it's at this moment, it's all about education, and it's all about helping legislators better understand where the industry sits today and what it would take to get to where the FSMA 204 initial regulation was kind of going, and come up with a realistic expectation for the next 10 and a half months. So I'll give you an example. If you were to need to trace an orange, let's say, from the grower, an exact specific orange from the grower to the point of sale where you put it in your bag and take it home to eat it, there needs to be some sort of RFID or tag on every single piece of produce in a store to help understand which exact orange went into your grocery cart versus my grocery cart, right?
Right.
that is something that doesn't exist today, and isn't being done anywhere in the world. So that's one example of why I think a lot of grocers are fighting pretty hard right now through education to help legislators understand that, really the regulation needs to be in until the product gets to the store. And then you can track it by lot code. But once need to get down to the each level, there's a whole nother level of tracking and infrastructure required that doesn't exist today. And then the other example is just thinking through kind of producing food in a store. So let's say you get a case of avocados and you want to make guacamole with it. You know, are you tracking when you get your little container of guacamole to take home with you? Do you know exactly which avocados
Right.
went into that guacamole and which tomatoes and which lime and which onion? Mm.
Yeah.
Right
And
now,
how do you
no. The
continue that
answer is
too? Yeah.
absolutely not.
Well, I know, people in retail are struggling with the same issues on hard goods. There are
Yes.
uh, regulations that the EU has prompted and is about to
Yes.
start enforcing that are um, producing a lot of headache on this side of things. But also, I think one of the big things, and I really love to get your perspective on this, is like, look, you know, uh, product transparency, supply chain transparency isn't just this regulatory hurdle. There's massive opportunities to do really good and smart things for business there as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've actually been talking a lot about that internally. That's a great point. And we've been talking about with solutions like Relex, for example, if we could track code dates to the lot level in a better way than we can today, then it could drastically help us improve our forecasting capabilities. So I'll give you an example. We have a solution called True Inventory that helps grocers and retailers understand exactly what they have on hand for every item in every store. And it tries to take into account human behavior as well. So, for example, when was the last time you went to buy milk and you just took the carton from the front, right? Most people look at the date codes and take the one with the longest date code, which often is in the back. So the
People do
idea
that?
of
Are you kidding me?
last in, first out doesn't work
Right.
for a lot of products sitting on a grocery shelf, especially around the perimeter, right, and the fresh product. And so how do you factor those behaviors in when you try to help grocers understand how many they actually have on their shelf that are, and what the expiration dates of those are? It's a very, very complex problem that gets made much easier when you're tracking expiration dates at the lot level and which lots sit on what shelf at what time. And so, yeah, there's no question that if we can get to a deeper, like if some of these regulations go into effect and we get a deeper level of data related to, for example, lot codes, um, there's a lot of potential return on investment for some of these systems that are going to need to get implemented to be able to do some of this tracking. But right now, it just feels like a big headache for sure.
Yeah. And everybody's kind of going, I know it's a good thing. I know it's a good thing. I know it's a good thing, but almost like we're telling ourselves that just to get through it.
People understand. I mean, do you want to know, if the avocados in your guacamole came from here versus there, especially if there was an issue with some product along the way? Like, yes, it would be great. There's definitely benefits to the consumer, but it's more of a matter of how do we get there and
Yeah.
at what
Yeah.
pace do we get there,
And at what cost,
and at what
because
cost exactly.
there's a lot of money that goes into these kinds of things. I'm thinking some of the research that's come out over the past year or two about specifically Gen Z and their X and Y. We're starting to look at and demand even uh, you know supply chain transparency and authenticity in the brand messaging and those kinds of things. With Gen Z, it appears to be like it's an imperative. Like they won't, if they detect fakeness or you're trying to hide something from them, they're out, they're
Absolutely.
gone. They're not even gonna consider it.
Yeah,
So for
absolutely.
companies that are trying to engage Gen Z, these kinds of ideas of, and it's more pertinent in hard goods, I'm sure, but to be able to demonstrate that you're at least giving a real effort to show that you're looking at your supply chain, you're being as open and as honest as you can be with what you're doing, that goes a long way.
Absolutely. It's actually highly relevant on the foods in the food space as well. I think these new generations care a lot about sustainability and they also care a lot about local product. And they want simpler supply chains. They want to be eating avocados, at least in California, were grown in California.
Right.
That is a big topic of discussion, is especially in the grocery community, is how to appeal to this newer generation. How can we, tout more sustainability efforts, and how can we also help them understand that we are, localized in some ways, shape, or form.
We've done a bit of work in the alcohol and beverage industry, and watching the demographic shifts kind of correlate to the products that people are consuming there. Younger generations and what they're drinking, older generations what they all expected to be drinking right about now, and that correlates directly with what younger generations are also consuming, in every other aspect
Yeah.
of their lives.
Well, there's a massive trend towards non-alcoholic alcoholic beverages. I went to the biggest food trade show, I think in the US, maybe in the world. It occurs every March, called Expo West. And it's in Southern California. And this past March, so 2024, there was a massive trend towards non-alcoholic alcoholic beverages. And Guinness actually had a huge booth that was all non-alcoholic, which was never seen anything. I've been going to these trade shows for many years, never seen anything like that. It was interesting. My other favorite one was some of the hard seltzer brands going to non-alcoholic, which just made everyone laugh because
I don't
we were
even
all thinking
understand
like,
that.
if White Claw is non-alcoholic, isn't that just like
Then what is it?
soda water?
Yeah, I don't know.
So,
It's the idea of
but
alcohol or
you know
something.
what? You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. I think some of it has to do with people wanting to have a certain brand in their hand at a party or whatnot. Whether so there's wanting to feel included in the trend and wanting to feel part of things, and it's not
Yeah.
only about the taste and the product. So
I feel like that's a great conversation when you have an actual beer in your hand. You can talk about those kinds of things and really get into it, but some later date. Um, there's one other thing I would love to talk about, but it has the potential of taking us, extending this conversation for hours and hours, and that is AI and retail. Like, what are the practical applications versus what's the hype? Because if you were NRF like I was, that everything's AI and
yeah,
everything is massively hyped,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you really have to kind of clear away a lot of smoke to try and figure out what the reality is right now.
Yeah, it's really true. One of my colleagues was joking with me and said at NRF, because of just all the signage everywhere, he was like, "Did you know that the letters AI are in retail?" Like, no
Are you
way.
kidding me? I
It
know.
was everywhere. So yeah, um, there's no question that there's a huge amount of hype around AI right now, and the benefits that it can bring to retail. And I think for me, it all comes back to kind of where I started this, which is how do you drive efficiencies? I listened, one of the sessions I went to at NRF, they were talking a lot about how the idea of implementing software is so different to what it was 20 years ago. And a lot of that has to do with AI. So it's not only the solutions, but it's also the implementation strategy and how you go about implementing software. And it's also something I mentioned about uh, having these data connectors that now sit in place. I mean, things have just gotten so much more efficient. You think about cleansing your data, there's a solution for that. There's an AI
Yep.
powered solution for that. There didn't used to be all these kind of quick shortcuts that retailers could take to kind of creating that more optimized solution and end state. But I honestly do think ultimately there's a lot of it comes back to this idea of being able to, a couple things. Number one, better understand your customer more, better understand how to personalize. I mean, we talked a little bit about that earlier, but being able to use all of the massive amounts of data out there to understand what each customer actually wants, and how to communicate that to them, and then also being able to understand what you actually need to have in your store from an assortment standpoint, and then quantity, and what should that price be? When should you be promoting? I mean, there's so many massive decisions that need to be made at every retailer that have come from extensive amounts of data, and there was a lot of inefficiency and inaccuracy going on when everything was being done in Excel.
Completely. Yeah.
Um, and so I think there's a lot of upside potential for these grocers if they. It's all about prioritization, though. They also have to really think through what are the biggest problems they're trying to solve, and how can AI help them solve those problems, rather than being like looking at the new shiny toy. Because I think that's for me what NRF sort of felt like, is there were a lot of new shiny toys everywhere, but it was what are the problems? I think it's always better to start with problem and then solution.
Right. Right. Well, let me wrap with this question. Next year, this time, after NRF has the dust has settled on NRF, maybe you will have gone to grocery shop or one of the other, 10,000 events that we all attend. What do you think will be the buzz in a year?
I think there's going to be a lot of buzz around retail media networks. I personally think so. This year, there was a lot of conversation about electronic shelf labels. I think that will continue to become a big part of the sort of landscape in retail. And it's much bigger in Europe. I think it's going to be much, much bigger in the US in the next 12 months. And then the other big trend, which we've been talking about as we go to grocery shop and NRF and whatnot for 3 years now, we've been talking about retail media networks. But once again, if you look at Europe and where they are, which is quite much, way further ahead than we are in the US, I think that's going to be the other massive trend that you start to see everywhere, is how do we actually incorporate retail media networks into everything that we're doing. And then I guess the last piece is related to both of those two things, which is around personalization. And once again, there's been so much hype about personalization, but are we actually starting to execute on it, and who's succeeding and how are they succeeding?
That's a conversation I want to be a part of in a year, because one, you're focused on it as well, but two, especially because of the scope of what Customer Land is about, it all boils down to personalization on some level.
Right.
And I'm old enough, asterisk on that point, to have heard like we've nailed personalization, and I've been hearing it for over a decade. Like, look what we can do now. And
We have
come on,
not.
guys, come on, yeah.
I mean, we know as customers that that's not true, right?
Yeah,
I know
exactly.
that that's not true. We're
Right.
getting there. There's been major steps forward, but we haven't nailed it. There's still a lot. I definitely still get advertising for cat products, but I don't own a cat. I mean, that's one silly example, but
Right.
I don't care about what cat food's on sale next week. I don't own a cat. Like, why are you
Right.
telling me that?
Right.
So there's a lot of advancements to be made still, I think, around personalization.
I do too. It's going to be fun to see it. And I honestly think that for all the hype and all of the incremental improvements that I've seen over the years, decade plus, um, AI is going to drive leaps in personalization that nobody could really achieve before. So I think we're going to start seeing some of the fruits of that next year. I think it's going to become
I
really
think so
interesting.
too. And I think the one other thing I didn't mention before, but I think it kind of ties all of the things we just talked about together in some way, is like more self-checkout technology, especially in grocery, where there's been a lot of hesitancy, a lot of theft, a lot of shrink. I think we're going to make a lot of strides towards figuring that out, because once again, in Europe, they're way ahead of us, and they have a huge amount more self-checkout technology that has led to a decrease in labor and a better customer experience for
And
shoppers.
less shrinkage, I'm sure.
Way less shrinkage.
Yeah, interesting little side note, and then I will let you go, is in our little grocery store where we live there, it's a chain. I think it's a chain, it's part of a much bigger chain, but they've had over the past year and a half or so, they've had three different self-checkout systems in place. So I don't know whether this is a test store or what, but
Mm.
um, just the other day we went through it and it stopped our checkout process midway, and we couldn't figure out why. So we called the person over who said, "Well, let me just replay the past few minutes for you." So she hit a button on the screen, and it played a video of what we were actually doing there. And apparently, what happened was, as my wife was checking something out, passing it through the scanner, she had her phone in her hand, and the system thought that was another item. So it stopped it to check it out, which I thought was really smart. Kind of
Wow.
embarrassing for a few minutes while they pat you down or whatever, but no, which they didn't do.
Wow.
But really smart. And that was the
Wow.
smartest version of that I think I've seen so far. So cool.
That's cool. The next step to that, by the way, is facial recognition, so that you don't even have to put in your, phone number or anything, and they're just going to know who you are, and they're going to know everything about you
Right.
immediately by just seeing your face in that camera.
It's out there already. Okay, then I'll let you go after this. I worked on a project about 2, maybe 3 years ago, where Amazon was building out a some of their biometric checkouts. And I can't remember, it was a part of your hand. It wasn't your fingerprint. It was like a palm something, I guess. But it was basically a biometric
Yeah,
reader. I think you just like wave your hand over
I
something.
saw that. I remember
And
seeing that.
it was really cool.
I
Um,
haven't seen it in practice yet, though. That was probably two NRFs ago.
Yeah, and I think what happened, I don't know this for sure, but I think what happened is it was too creepy.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
just
Or was it not accurate enough? Or maybe it was a combination of the two.
I mean, from what I understood, it was highly accurate. Um, but there were a large number of people who just got freaked out by it. Like, is there a chip in me? What does that mean now? How do you know that? That kind of thing. So,
Mhm.
anyways, the fascinating world we live in. With that,
Totally.
Amanda Oren, thank you so much for your time. Just once again, Amanda is VP of Industry Strategy Grocery for North America for Relex. And I want to thank you for your time. And at least for me, this was worth all the calendar wrangling.
Thank you. I really enjoyed myself as well. Thank you so much for having me.